In the early 1990s, as the operation of mail trains faced an uncertain future, Royal Mail, in cooperation with British Rail and its shadow company Rail Express Systems, embarked on an ambitious project to revitalise the travelling post office service across the UK. This scheme would come to fruition in the form of Railnet, a massive refurbishment scheme which was set to see sustained mail-on-rail operations well into the middle of the 21st century, but only after a decade was rendered obsolete as the mail train contract was swept away. The British mail train itself can trace its roots back to as early as November 1830 with the Liverpool and Manchester Railway, while from 1838, the Railways Conveyance of Mails Act of that year meant railway companies were obliged to carry mail. This resulted in the development of specialised rolling stock, which allowed for the sorting of parcels and correspondence while on the move, rather than at fixed sorting offices, thereby creating the Travelling Post Office, or TPO, a staple of the British railway network for the next 150 years. By the middle of the 20th century, though, the railway industry was facing a steep decline thanks to the sudden rise of road and air competition following World War II, and therefore, in the 1960s, attempts were made to speed up the transportation of mail and parcels under the Parcel Post Plan of May 1969, which introduced 90-mile-an-hour mail services between terminus stations in London and Bradford, Nottingham, Birmingham, Bristol and Cardiff. This would be followed by additional routes by the end of 1970, although due to the transport arrangements of the mail train not suiting post office operations, the parcels contract was not renewed with British Rail for the long term in 1974, opting instead for a combined multimodal system of rail transport, road transport, and the containerisation of certain goods aboard BR's fledgling Freightliner service. Throughout the 1970s, an emphasis on mechanised and computer sorting at dedicated post offices meant the TPO was given the unfortunate prospect of losing its role, although the £74 million profit earned through mail services was one of the few steady sources of income for BR during a period when it struggled to recover from the beaching acts of the previous decade. In total, during the 1970s, mail trains would travel 8 million miles and carry 7 million mail bags per annum, with 10,000 trains transporting mail per day on both dedicated mail train consists, but also under the Red Star parcel scheme, wherein mail and parcels were transported in sacks aboard regular passenger trains. It was in 1978, though, that British Rail became acutely aware of the problems faced by the limited speed of Britain's railway network when the Post Office announced the transfer of mail traffic from rail to air on the primary London to Edinburgh service, followed by the opening of dedicated air mail hubs at Speke Airport in Liverpool and East Midlands Airport in Leicestershire during 1979 and 1982 respectively, creating an internal network of domestic mail flights which, by 1992, accounted for 3 million items of postage conveyed per annum. On March 31, 1981, the contract between British Rail and the Post Office was extended, allowing Royal Mail the ability to transfer mail aboard up to 20,000 passenger and dedicated parcels trains per day, the appeal of the mail train being cemented in the fact that many sorting offices have been built next to train stations. However, a major loss for BR during the late 1980s was the end of the newspaper services in 1988, when, with the rise of electronically transferable articles, the traditional printing and publishing centres of London and Manchester were rendered largely obsolete, compounded further by the rapid expansion of TV and radio news. By the start of the 1990s, rail-borne mail traffic was continuing to drop, the Post Office preferring the establishment of concentrated sorting centres located at airports such as East Midlands to complement their domestic air transport arm, while from 1991, virtually all Saturday movements of letters and packages was transferred from rail to road under the Roadrunner scheme implemented by Royal Mail. Seeing this decline, a joint project was developed known as Railnet, launched in 1993, which was to be created in partnership with the dedicated light freight and parcel sector of British Rail called Rail Express Systems, or RES, which had been formally launched in October 1991 as the mail arm of the rail industry. At a cost of £150 million, the Railnet scheme would introduce a sweeping improvement and consolidation of the travelling post office system, which would include the opening of a series of rail-served terminals, the commissioning of a main hub at Willesden, and the procurement of new purpose-built rolling stock. The creation of RES essentially removed the previous system of transferring mail aboard regular passenger trains through further investment in dedicated parcels workings, and with the proposal of the Railnet scheme, set to be delivered over the course of 13 years, Royal Mail would be capable of transferring up to 100 million more letters per weekday than before, adopting stringent security and high-performance demands for both Royal Mail and RES alike. The first move under Railnet was the replacement of mail transfer being undertaken at London's terminal stations by moving all capital operations to a single dedicated centre at Stonebridge Park, developing a 15-acre road rail hub adjacent to the West Coast Main Line and the North Circular Road in North London, called the Willesden Railnet Terminal. This facility was opened on September 30th, 1996, and was essentially an additional London terminus with platforms but no passengers. The 7-platform facility replacing the previous sorting centres at King's Cross, St Pancras, Liverpool Street, Paddington and Euston stations, and allowed for the seamless road-to-rail transfer of mail and parcels. Similarly to the Willesden Railnet Terminal, various other terminals were also established at strategic centres across the UK, including Shieldmoor for Glasgow, Lowfell for Newcastle, Warrington for Manchester and Liverpool, Doncaster for Leeds and York, Bristol Parkway for Bristol and Cardiff, Peterborough for Cambridgeshire and Anglia, and Tunbridge for South East England, as well as dedicated platforms being introduced at Stafford for the West Midlands. To complement these new facilities, RES employed its own fleet of locomotives and rolling stock in order to operate the service, inheriting nearly 700 mail vans and a motley selection of multiple units and locomotives, including a series of DMUs and EMUs, such as the Class 114 and Class 302, which have been converted from passenger to mail use, while also hosting its own contingent of Class 08 shunters, 26 Class 47 diesels, and 15 Class 86 electrics, as well as being complemented by the addition of 5 brand new Class 90s upon its formation in 1991. The most important part of the 1993 Railnet plan was the provision of a brand new parcels multiple unit which would replace loco-hauled mail trains on the electrified UK network, this coming in the form of the Class 325, which was contracted from the Derby-based ABB Transportation. This would comprise the delivery of 16 4-car electric multiple units capable of operating from 25 kV overhead wires and 750 volt DC third rail, the new trains being designed to carry containerized mail rather than having on-board sorting facilities as per the travelling post office. Fundamentally, the underpinnings and body shells of the 325s were based on the same profile as the Class 319 Thameslink units of 1988, although the regular automatic sliding doors were replaced by 4 roller-shut doors per carriage, and also included the traction systems and running gear of the 319s, while the cab fronts were based on those of the recently introduced Class 365 and 465 networker units, the 325s being equipped with third rail pickup shoes for the fleet's potential use on the southern region to the proposed Railnet terminal at Tunbridge, and their top speed was 100 miles an hour. In addition to the Class 325s, improvements in time saving for the regular loco-hauled operation was achieved through the conversion of 42 driving trailers from what had formerly been Class 307 EMUs into propelling control vehicles or PCVs, essentially a variation on the push-pull technology that had been introduced previously on the Mark II driving brake standard open passenger carriages for the Great Eastern Main Line. The intention of the PCVs was to allow for low-speed push-pull shunting at depots and terminals without the need for either locomotives to run round or for a secondary locomotive to haul the train, the PCV stock being converted at the Hunslet Barclay factory in Kilmarnock between 1994 and 1996, while the RES fleet of Class 47s were modified to allow for push-pull use. Throughout the mid-1990s, the various aspects of the Railnet scheme were implemented, with service cutbacks being placed on lower priority or smaller services, while trunk mail train corridors were enhanced by the introduction of new terminals and rolling stock. The final layout of the RES network would be to serve 45 stations and 9 Railnet terminals across the UK for road-to-rail transfer, although the travelling post office continued to lose much of its relevance as mechanical and computerised sorting at post offices and sorting centres meant the practice of employing a full sorting crew aboard the mail trains was becoming increasingly uneconomic. During the privatisation of British Rail in the mid-1990s, the RES company was put up for sale, and on December 9, 1995, the bid to operate mail services was won by a consortium led by the American railroad company Wisconsin Central, inheriting 164 locomotives and 677 wagons, before being integrated into the wider English, Welsh and Scottish Railway or EWS in February 1996, following Wisconsin Central's acquirement of the 3 shadow freight franchises, Load Haul, Mainline Freight and Transrail Freight. Around this time, the Class 325 units started to become operational, but problems were encountered due largely to the recently established private railway infrastructure firm Railtrack, which began setting out new safety criteria that made it difficult for types which had been ordered under the previous BR regime, but not yet completed, to adhere to, specific examples being the Class 325 mail units and the Class 92 electrics built for Channel Tunnel services. Royal Mail would state in the House of Commons in May 1996 that 15 months had been spent trying to satisfy Railtrack's safety assessment for the Class 325 fleet, but the units were still not approved for regular service, leading to the Chief Executive of Royal Mail writing to both Railtrack and the Secretary of State for Transport demanding a resolution, resulting in only one unit being used on one of the intended routes, with overall introduction of the remaining 15 sets commencing in September of the same year. Under EWS ownership, in order to increase the average speed of loco-hauled mail trains on the non-electrified network, the company ordered a fleet of 30 125-mile-an-hour diesel locomotives from Alstom at their factory in Valencia, Spain, at a cost of £45 million. These engines, which were to be powered by prime movers built by electromotive diesel, coming to fruition as the Class 67 of October 1999, which would replace the aging Class 47s by the middle of 2000. However, despite EWS's ambitious plan for rapid introduction, problems with the locomotives being slightly too large for the British loading gauge meant they had to be revised at a notable delay, with acceptance trials eventually starting in December 1999 and all 30 units in the UK by 2000, although further problems of high axle loads meant an initial speed restriction of 110 miles an hour was enforced until bogie modifications had been made, the Class 67s being gradually reworked between July 2001 and June 2003 so as to reach their 125-mile-an-hour top speed. Trouble once again brewed, though, in October 2000, as following the crash of a GNER Mark IV set at Hatfield due to a metal fatigue-induced deterioration of the trackwork that resulted in 4 deaths, Railtrack implemented speed restrictions and, in some cases, the outright closure of several mail corridors, while a mixture of flooding and enforced maintenance of the permanent way during the winter of that year meant Royal Mail's confidence in the ability of rail-borne mail traffic was waning severely. Come 2003, 49 daily mail trains were operating across the UK, 16 of which continued to utilise the travelling post office mobile sorting system, and thereby constituted the carriage of 20 million items of mail, or around 14% of all mail carried in the UK, during the first quarter of the year, with EWS declaring that the punctuality and performance of their mail services far exceeded those presented by the regular passenger train operators. Behind the scenes, though, Royal Mail's loss of faith in mail trains had led to protracted negotiations starting in 2001 between themselves and EWS as to a possible renewal of the mail train contract, all while the post office had been slowly transferring more of its mail diagrams from rail to either road or air transport. The negotiations between EWS and Royal Mail would ultimately fail, which, in combination with a rising concern over health and safety arrangements aboard the TPO service, meant in June 2003, Royal Mail announced it would cease all rail-borne mail traffic, focusing entirely on road and air-based alternatives. Throughout the remainder of 2003, mail train services were gradually wound down until eventually, on the night of January 9, 2004, the very last mail-on-rail services ran, bringing an end to 174 years of continuous mail trains, and in so doing leaving the nearly brand-new fleet of 30 Class 67s and 16 Class 325 units without a purpose. This would also render obsolete all of the £150 million Railnet terminals after only 6 to 8 years of use, the Railnet terminal at Bristol Parkway being of particular note, as this had only opened in May 2000, before the 12,000 square foot facility was closed in 2004 and demolished in late 2007. This wasn't entirely the end of mail trains, though, as in April 2004, it emerged that Royal Mail were in talks with GBRF as to the possibility of resuming a number of mail trains at a small scale, resulting from December 1, 2004, in the announcement that GBRF had been awarded a 4-month contract to operate Royal Mail's Class 325 fleet over the Christmas period, followed by a performance review in March 2005 as to whether the contract could be extended. This review ultimately came out successful for GBRF, and from May 2005, Royal Mail signed a new contract with the operator to run 2 trains each night between Willesden and Shieldmore on the West Coast Main Line, carrying 1 million items of mail daily, this contract being extended year after year until June 2010. After this, the Royal Mail contract was awarded to EWS's successor DB Cargo, this time for the running of 7 mail trains on the West Coast Main Line, later changed from June 2015 to 6 daily services on the West Coast Main Line and 2 on the East Coast Main Line. Unfortunately, the future for Royal Mail's return to rail operations was a fleeting one, as in September 2024, The company announced that it would be stopping its mail-on-rail service and withdrawing the Class 325s, Royal Mail stating that the primary reason was due to the Class 325s being life-expired and rail-borne mail traffic constituting only 3% of mail conveyed up and down the UK. Against an original withdrawal date of October 2024, services to Low Fell were axed on June 14th of the same year, while the last ever run of Class 325s on the mail services for Royal Mail was the 1 Sierra 55 Daventry to Shieldmoor on September 20th of the same year, as operated by 325011 and 325014, most of the Class 325s being promptly dispatched for scrap once retired, though Royal Mail has stated there may be plans in the future to reintroduce mail train services. Beyond the removal of the mail train for Royal Mail, the only other significant parcel conveyance rail service operational in the UK as of 2025 is the Varamis rail run between Birmingham International and Glasgow, with a pair of former Greater Anglia Class 321s being enlisted on overnight high-speed parcels trains up and down the West Coast Main Line, with this service having commenced during 2024. As for Railnet, this was, essentially, the pinnacle of efficiency operating a mail service within the UK, as it allowed a perfect mixture of new high-speed rolling stock in combination with dedicated terminals and computerized sorting, which easily outperformed the sluggish and time-consuming road and air competition. Sadly, fate conspired against Railnet, and in so doing rendered the £150 million expense of implementing its many facets obsolete within less than 5 years of their construction. Although with the recent turn to more sustainable transport alternatives, the future for parcels and mail traffic on the railway may soon be facing a new renaissance.